always get a little nervous when I know it's being recorded because I got to clean up my act a little bit. Our commission meetings, I'm the chair of the Fish and Wildlife Commission for the state of Washington, and our commission meetings are always streamed live on TVW, and sometimes I forget that when I have the gavel. And pleasure to be here, especially amongst so many old friends and neighbors. I am I'm a hamster. I live here, so this is all near and dear to my heart. And I did come in last night at 11 o'clock from Cordova, almost not because it was fogged in. So, but that was, I am here and I'm happy to be here. So yesterday, I see that the topic for the conference is searching for certainty in uncertain times. And yesterday's agenda was challenges and solutions. I'm going to fit in a little bit more probably with yesterday's talk, even though that does dovetail into the science world as well, because you can't separate challenges, solutions, and science these days, though I think some people do try to separate that all too much. And I want to preface also, I think any of us engaged in the environmental arena, we have to be optimists, because in essence we're dealing with what's been bad in the past, but what can be better in the future. I don't think you can be an educator, a scientist, or anybody, again, engaged in the broad environmental arena without being an optimist. However, that said, it's a challenge sometimes. I think I've come to the point that I describe myself as a despairing optimist. And we live in difficult times and challenging times. But again, that said, we've seen differences, we've seen changes. I grew up, spent a lot of my life on the shore of Lake Erie in the 50s. And when the river was burning in Ohio and the fish kills were prevalent, you could go out in the summer and pick up fish because they were suffocating, no DO, and the algal blooms, and there was no such thing as wastewater treatment. We lived right our house was on the shore, and there was a holding pond for septic, but then direct discharge into the lake. And I grew up thinking dead fish on the beach were normal, that we would actually rake them up and burn them. I mean, and fortunately that has changed. So there's always hope. And just little things not a little thing, but seeing like eagles. I didn't see my first eagle in the wild till I was probably 27. And now, in many areas, they're like sparrows, So it's there is room for optimism. But I'm going to look a bit why I'm a despairing optimist these days, because a dose of reality is sometimes difficult to take, but I think it's a dose that we all have to take to keep our keel even and progressive and not just idealistic. Though idealism is always necessary, that we deal in a world that won't alone make the changes necessary that we need. I'm going to read the strategic plan, or the mission statement from Department of Fish and Wildlife. Now, when I read this, it seems to be a pretty straightforward, simple mission statement. To preserve, protect, and perpetuate fish, wildlife, and ecosystems while providing sustainable fish and wildlife recreational and commercial opportunities. Now, you hear that, and it seems, who could disagree with that? Let me just pull out a couple words there to show you. Each one of these words would be worthy of a week-long conversation unto its own, or a years-long litigation stream, or request for public disclosures. Preserve, protect, and perpetuate. Slice those words depending on who you're talking to. Totally different interpretations. Even the word ecosystem, to some, they don't get that one. Sustainable. I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but I always had hope in that word, but that's getting so trashed and then recreational and commercial opportunities. Again, simple, but it depends who you're talking to. Sue mentioned the word polarization, and I guess that's one of the areas that I see, again, with using these words as benchmarks, but across the board. I'm in Olympia every month for commission meetings. Some of you have attended those. commissioners sit up in the front, and then public is in the back, and sometimes it's a room like this, hundreds of people, and then everybody gets their 3 minutes to talk, and buzzers go off, and you've seen that. My life before I moved to Bellingham was in D.C., and I've been in Senate hearings. I was with EPA. I was in a lot of contentious arenas being at EPA in D.C., but I never felt threatened physically until I came here and until I came to do commission meetings in Olympia. And again, this is Department of Fish and Wildlife. This is not Department of Corrections. We deal with critters. But if any of you have been at commission meetings, especially when on the agenda, you see a couple words, and those words could be gillnet, wolf, and on and on. We have armed fish and wildlife officers in all of our commission meetings. And a lot of times, as the chair, I will ask the officers who are normally in the back to move up to the front, to sit like here and here, so that their presence is very visible. When we were dealing with the wolf management plan, I actually had to say to the audience that we have not only uniformed officers that are visible, but undercover officers in the audience. Now, this isn't just for effect. More than once, I've seen somebody get up in the audience and say, I don't care what you decide up there. The solution to this problem is in my truck, and I'm going to go get it. And officers have taken, I've seen them literally tackle people. Again, we're dealing with words like fish, wildlife, ecosystem, sustainable, recreation. The polarization has gotten so intense and dangerous that, and dangerous. The anger is real. And the words compromise, we've lost those in our vernacular. It's them versus us always. And I'll tell you, you want to see an interesting group of dynamics. It's when we drive in for the commission meetings in the Natural Resource Building on a Saturday morning. We meet Friday and Saturday, but Saturday is normally a busy day. When you see people dressed in costumes, you know it's going to be a bad day. Or when you see 100 people waiting to get into the area with cowboy hats, in uniform, the costumes or rainbow hair is one uniform. The other uniform are pearl buttons, cowboy shirt, cowboy hat. Because when you look down an audience sometimes, cowboy hats, rainbow hair. And when you deal with an issue like wolves, that polarization is very real. Also, the issue of anti-government today that we see perpetuating. We saw what happened in Oregon last year. The whole notion of public lands debate. I don't get that one myself, but I just drove across the country from Michigan, Upper Peninsula to Everett on Highway 2, and you see some scary bumper stickers along the way. And I don't know how we've gotten like that. When I was a kid, I always loved to see when it said, Department of Conservation land and, state land, because it meant I could go out there hunting and fishing and doing all sorts of stuff. But that anti-government thing. And also the issue of climate change, or however you want to phrase that term, acidification. Just coming from meetings up in Alaska, listening to folks from Barrow talking about the ice pack that isn't an ice pack, listening to representatives from the pollock industry or the cod industry and how that's changing overnight, not always to the best. So what are some of the challenges when we reflect on this mission statement there? And how do we view that in the Department of Fish and Wildlife? One is that we are a changing society. I was fortunate. I had a father that took me hunting and fishing. I was in Scouts. I look forward to that. That got me hooked and got me involved in all of the what I do, a career. But we look at today's kids. How many of them in urban world even get outside? How many of them understand nature? How many understand where their food comes from? We're seeing that lack of contact with nature across the board. That, coupled with the other side of the fence, an aging population, of which, when I look in the mirror, I reflect the typical population. When we look at our commission meetings, they all look like me. They're white, they're male, they're middle-aged. But they look like me. And when you talk to somebody like the people that run the Seattle Boat Show, they do an exit survey every year. And every year for the past 15 years, the average age has gone up. You know, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies has a demographic about participation in outdoor activities like fishing and hunting. It's peaking a little bit right now because of the boomers. But when that boomer population hits 70, 74, you know, it drops off a cliff. So we look at a challenge to the traditional North American model of wildlife management. It's changing. In the last 5 years, there have been 2.2 million fewer hunters in the U.S. That participation rate in hunting is going down. Fishing is a little stable, but it's going down. That doesn't mean people have to go out there and buy hunting and fishing licenses, but it means the funding model is changing and how that will be paid for. We hear all the time, you know, the license can't go up, you know, let the people that go up pay for something else. Again, that polarization. That brings into the whole other dynamic. We as a department are changing, and we have to, because the traditional audience is changing. How do we get more people engaged in nature? You know, I don't like the term non-consumptive versus consumptive. If anybody's got better ones, we are always grasping with that one. But that's something that the Association of Fish, the national, is trying to do. How do we get people to participate more, but also pay a fair share? You know, they've looked at taxes on birdseed and binoculars and all sorts of different things. But that model is changing. So how does this all reflect in the optimism that we need to share? I said earlier the word sustainability. I had hope for that one. You know, being a person that was, you know, first Earth Day and all this sort of stuff, and but the words environmentalist, ecologist. I mean, ecologist, that's just science, but environmentalist, that took on a whole political, you know, connotation with it. And each one of those words is very polarizing. You know, and my whole life and professional life, a lot of people say, how can I be an environmentalist and be a hunter or a fisherman? You know, again, either or dynamics. So when the word sustainability came around, I thought, wow, that's the unifying word. Because the opposite of being sustainable is unsustainable. I mean, I don't think anybody would adhere to that as a goal in life. And especially in the West, where we have a history of ghost towns, you know, go in, burn the resource base out, and move on. That's not a model of economic development. That's an unsustainable model. A few years back, I co-chaired the Washington State Sustainability Commission under Governor Locke. And I was very encouraged when that was set up, because around the table, it was a very big table, very round table, very big table. We had Boeing, Microsoft, the tribes, agriculture, unions, universities. We had all sectors. And I thought, wow, we developed a plan. That was when you have all sectors around the table and you develop a plan, you know, you're not leaving somebody out there and say, hey, we weren't there. We tried hard to get all these different folks. We had the military, because they own a lot of land, and a lot of that's very environmentally rich land. And that went on and on. But now you look at the word sustainability in today. Some states have banned its use in state government. We have federal agencies that have removed the word. You cannot use the word sustainable. So my hope for the word the concept of sustainability being the great unifier in a polarized world is, I don't know, maybe that will change too. So what can be a unifier out there? That's a difficult thing. I'm encouraged to see the folks from BTC here. I mean, you guys are the future, and always think about what can bring people together out there. But I've come to a few areas that I've seen in dealing with very contentious political leaders in Olympia and in DC. There's one thing that brings people together, and that's the concept of youth. You know, nobody can say they want a less quality of life experience for their children or grandchildren. That's just, you know, if you do, run away from that person. But that's something that can bring people together. I've talked about in different contexts about youth engagement. The average teenager today spends 11 hours wired. 11 hours hooked to something. They should be out using their nose, their ears, their eyes in different ways. So how do we get more youth engaged? That means more recreational opportunities. You can't do that in a degraded environment. You have to have a healthy environment. So seeing how we can get more youth involved does bring the red and the blue together. It's a bridge, and we need bridges. Even sometimes if those bridgeheads are small, we need to find some common ground because all the stuff we've been talking about is not common ground. We also need other unifiers. We have polarizers every day, but we need unifiers. We're fortunate around here to have unifiers with the Skagit River and the Nooksack and Enhancement Association. Those are unifiers. They bring communities of different values and perspectives together. When you see the folks that are in NC and the Skagit Rivershed Council, you see ag, you see youth, old, and when you see them all out in working parties, that's good. We have 14 of those RFEGs around the state. We're fortunate in this area to have two of the best, I think. We also need good science. I mean, again, coming back to science, you can't get away from that. We deal in a world of which too many people are basing their decisions emotionally. We're also dealing in a world of which we are seeing more policy on fish and wildlife issues being put forth by initiative. And that's not the way to go. Whether it's east-west divide or north-south divide in the state, wherever the population base is, that will carry the initiative. And that will not always be based on science. Very seldom it ever is. It'll be based on numbers of people voting. And a lot of those people don't understand the issues. But we see that more and more, whether it's on wolf issues or hunting issues. But we need science that is not done in isolation. I will be mildly a heretic here. Another former life, I was a dean for a long time and a faculty member. And we're fortunate here to have some outstanding scientists that we'll be talking to you shortly. But we need scientists that don't just do science in the classroom or in their lab. We need science that is translatable and translated to the general public. Because if it is done just in the confines of the academic world alone, it will increase the polarization that exists out there. We need translators to take the science there and translate it to the populace that understands it. More citizen science. Get people out there doing stuff that we rely on. Take science from the tower into the plains and into the fields and into the marshes and into the public hearings like this. And it's happening. I mean, those translators are there. So at the end of the day, what gives me my motivation and hope? Two reasons that I didn't have 3 years ago. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old grandson. And I just remember as I grew up, when I started to find the magic in nature and the understanding. And that gives me hope, seeing those little eyes out there, to want to be more of an optimist and less of a despairing optimist. But in order to have that optimism, we have to be unified more than we are. Because if we continue this road of polarization, I'm despairing for my grandsons. So thank you.
Let me say a few words about that.
Hi. So you said that because we have such a big population base that is polarized and a lot of things can pass as initiatives, has the commission talked about using the 1/8 of 1% allocation of sales tax like states like Missouri and Arkansas used for their conservation programs?
Yes, and again, the word tax, whenever
Okay.
that enters into the lexicon,
It's not a new tax. It's
Right.
what those states do is they just allocate 1/8 of 1%.
But that has to
of-
go through the legislature.
Yeah. Do you
Yeah.
think that would have a good chance of passing if it was a public initiative? Do you think that would
That would be,
grab, grab
again, I'm not
hold?
anti-initiative. I'm just anti-initiative when it deals with biological questions. Like in Michigan, there's 700 wolves in the Upper Peninsula. They had a cull of 40, and to, because more in nature is not better, it's just more. And then that went to initiative that canceled that culling, that hunt. So in an instance like you're talking about, I think an initiative would be an outstanding direction to take.
That might be a solution to the non-consumptive use.
Yeah,
So-
the initiative's a great thing. It's just when it can, like anything, be used. And a lot of folks know that with population numbers, they can, like hound hunting in the state is an emotional. But that's a good point, yeah. Yes, sir.
Mine's kind of in the same vein as that. You mentioned that most things are passed by initiatives now, and we live in the Northwest where we're kind of spoiled, where it's the best natural, scenic area to live in the Northwest, at least in my opinion. But what about for areas like the Midwest or Kansas? Like, how would you suggest to promote conservation in those areas where there's not that inherent, obvious, in-your-face desire to protect what's already there? It's places that have already been like robbed of their natural resources or not necessarily as inherently scenic to begin with.
Well, I don't know, maybe having lived in a bunch of different states, each state is proud of its natural resource base and its history. So and I think every state, again, driving across the country just a couple of weeks ago, it's a gorgeous country, and it's very diverse, when you see that. So I think each state has to deal with it on its own basis. I've just seen several states that have, and again, I'm focusing on initiatives from a biological point of view, that when you have decisions that should be based in wildlife management principles that are being based on emotional, political agendas, that's not the best for the resource base. And it's an emotional, but yeah, it's a state-by-state issue, because, it's not an answer, but there's 50 different states and 50 different agendas, and we have more biomes than any other state, but every state driving along the country, they're all beautiful. And I think if you go to most states, they'd say their state's the most beautiful. Dave.
Hey, Brad, I totally agree with your point that one of the things that we need to help bring people together is good science on which to base decisions. But one of the frightening trends to me lately has been the polarization of science itself, that people will pick and choose what they want based not on what the science says, but what their sort of pre-existing agendas are. So from your experience, how do we avoid that polarization of science itself?
That's a dean question. Which one of you do I like the best? Who gets the funding this year? Wow, I have my own gut level response, which wouldn't be politically correct or tapeable. But it's not just science du jour. It's, I don't know. I can't, I think recognizing that, but just, as you know, knowing a lot of scientists, we all come with our own agendas. And sometimes that agenda is fueled by who will fund it, not always by what is the right thing to fund. And it all comes with individual egos. And, on the issue of climate, when 97% agree, you and I know one person that's made a name of disagreeing. Is that right? I guess it's right. I mean, wasn't in my college. But, I don't know. It's changed. It's changed. And again, that gets me a lot of these questions. You're making me more despairing. I throw this right back to the BTC students. You guys got to pick up the sword. Can't use the word sword, no.
Any other questions?
Well, thank you all. Great to see most of you again.